Hi, and welcome to The Art of Connection. I'm your host, Baya, and if this is your first week, welcome to a weekly series where I take everything I've learned from experts around the world and give you the most important takeaways so that if you don't have the time, you can skip the books, you can skip the podcasts, and you can get straight to the juice right here. So today we're talking about sex, specifically how to have a better sex life, which is why I am so excited to introduce you to my guest, sex therapist Kristin Hodson. Kristin is a certified sex therapist and the founder and executive director of The Healing Group. She's the co-author of the newly published book, Real Intimacy, a couple's guide for genuine, healthy sexuality, and is eagerly working on her second book, Yes, You Can Talk to Your Kids About Sex. In addition to being a therapist, she's an adjunct professor at the University of Utah and Westminster, teaching human sexuality to graduate-level students. She's been a guest on MTV, Huffington Post Live, SheKnows.com, and Women's Day magazine, as well as other TV and radio outlets where she takes live calls on sex and intimacy. She's a mom to 3 and partner to a man she adores. Kristin, I'm so happy to have you here. This is going to be so much fun.
Thanks.
Okay, so obviously today we're talking about sex and specifically how to have a better sex life. Mm-hmm. So let's start there. Where do couples generally get stuck in their sex life? Because I assume we enter into relationships, a lot of times the sex can start out being good, it's fun, it's
right.
And then it can die off. And then I also feel like you could enter into a relationship and sex could actually be really uncomfortable. And not only does it die off, it just sort of like plateaus and like never really gets better. So
Right. And so for right now to start, I'm starting with things are good. Like they're fine.
Okay.
Like they're good. It could be better, but it's fine.
Okay.
Couples oftentimes they don't realize they can make it better. They just don't know because we don't talk about sex. Yeah. We don't talk about sex. Sometimes friends are talking to each other, but also if it's not great and you don't know what you don't know how to improve it. So really the good concept, what I like people to start with is to figure out and describe where their sex life even is now. Because when I ask them, like, well, tell me about your sex life. And they'll go on a big narrative. I'm like, no, just describe it in 3 words. Tell me 3 words of how it is now. And they'll be like, okay, it's bland, it's predictable, and it's kind of uninteresting.
That sounds pretty familiar.
Right.
And like, I feel like that's a pretty common narrative, right?
Like,
okay.
Yeah. So then I'll be like, all right, now tell me how you want it to be. And they'll pause for a minute because it's a lot easier when you're talking about sex. I can tell you everything I don't like. I can tell you everything I don't want. I can tell you how often I'm not going to have it. But to actually have to sit and claim what I do want, way more vulnerable. It's a lot more vulnerable. Because if I tell you what I want, you might judge me. And you might be like, oh, okay. Yeah. Or how could you want it that much? Or that's only how much you want it? Or couples get really caught in the trap of negotiating sex. More than anything. Like we can negotiate where we're going to go to dinner on a Friday night.
Yeah.
We can do that. And if you order the chicken, I don't look at it and be like, you ordered the chicken? Yeah. It's just like how you like chicken. You like chicken. But so I ask them to describe in 3 words what you want. And then it creates great conversation, a starting point. Like that alone, that one exercise, getting people, when I was on the radio, and they would ask me questions, they would really want to know, how do we solve our sex problem? I'd be like, well, have you talked to your partner? Well, no. And they would want me to give them the answer with having to bypass any conversation.
Well, and I feel like that sort of stems from this inherent belief that what we want isn't normal or is strange, or like what we want is somehow taboo,
right?
Because it isn't this popular conversation. Is that, do you find truth to that?
So the number one question people ask, and sometimes this is all the therapy they need, is to know if they're normal, what we're doing is normal, is this normal? Normal is the question. Everyone wants to know if they're normal. Is what we're doing normal? Like, people ask me all the time, how often Like, what's normal for how often we should be having sex?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I can pull out a statistical average, but that's not as helpful to be like, well, what's normal for you? Like, let's figure this out and deconstruct it, because there isn't a normal. Like Emily Nagoski in her book, Come As You Are,
Yeah.
she talks about your sexuality being as unique as a snowflake. No two are alike. And that's true. So the biggest help, one of the biggest things to help couples improve their sex life is to start talking about what they want, what they like, what they want more of. Oftentimes women, they don't talk about it at all. Some women will fake orgasms because they want to avoid the conversation. And it's not even the quantity of sex, it's the quality of sex. If they can improve the quality of it,
Yeah.
like when I start talking about core play, foreplay, and all these things are like, what's that? And so I'll break it down and be like, well, core play, that's just like how you get each other turned on once you're in the bedroom. Like that's what we think of as foreplay.
Yeah.
That's like just the goodness of, I know how your body works and I know how my body works and this is what I need to get turned on.
Yeah.
Foreplay is everything in between. Like when I tell couples, foreplay begins the moment your last sexual encounter ended. It's everything in between. It's the energy investment into each other. It's the erotic energy. That it's the flirting, it's the kissing, and that's another hamper for people's sex lives, is they do zero erotic investment until they get to the bedroom. And then at 11:30 at night, someone will initiate and they'll be like, should we do this? It's like, I'm so tired.
Yeah, it feels
And
like a
so-
chore. Okay, so can we take a step back really quickly and
Yes.
talk about normalcy? Because so recently I was having this conversation with my girlfriends and we were talking about our partners and we were having this conversation around like one of the women was like, my partner wants it a lot and makes me feel like because I don't want it that much that for whatever reason, like I'm wrong for it, right? Like the laundry list of things. And so she came to the group of women and she was like, she literally just wanted input. She's like, how much do you want in mine? Is it okay to, right?
Yeah.
And so she got, and so anyhow, we all kind of talked about like, one of the women was talking about how she and her husband have sex once a week and they have an amazing relationship. And she's like, it takes once a week. It doesn't take this like 3 times a week that we talk about. And it was so comforting to just have this conversation with women where they're like, okay, wait a second, just because my partner wants it more than I do does not mean that because I may only want it once a week that like there's a hormonal imbalance.
Right.
Because I know for me, I always go to like, okay, what's wrong with my body? What isn't working right?
Yeah.
And is that why I don't want it as much as I feel like maybe I should, because we have
Right.
these numbers and these stats and
Yeah, and that the once a week and the idea that the partner sets the standard and that then you're broken. Like something's wrong with you. Like what is wrong with you?
I feel like especially as women.
As women, and this is something I educate a lot of women on, the difference on desire. Because what we're taught as spontaneous desire, which is often more of a male experience, where it kind of comes upon them and they're like, I am ready and let's do this now. And women are more responsive desire. Like, it's not going to plop out of the sky, but all of a sudden you could initiate something and things get going. And I'm like, yeah, I've got my desire now. Like, as I
Yeah.
get going and I get aroused, then my desire comes. Where men lead with desire, women typically have responsive desire. And we're not taught that.
No.
And so when women hear that, they also feel like, I'm not broken because I don't experience desire in the same way men do. And they feel normal. They feel like, and then I typically work with the partner and say, so what can you do to make her be more responsive? Like, what are you doing to improve? Like, are you helping reduce things at the end of the day so that she can put her brain to work or rest and be
Yeah.
like, I don't have to do the dishes, the kid, like all this is done. Are you partnering well? Are you doing all these things so that when you initiate, she'll respond and be like, yeah, I'm totally open to being intimate with you right now.
So when you're talking about foreplay,
Yeah.
I love the idea that it doesn't start in the bedroom. I talk about that all the time. I think it's so important. But what are some things, like what are some examples that you can talk about that are leading up to getting into the bedroom that work?
Yeah. So
I get this is couple specific also. Like I get it's like one size does not fit all.
no. And the big thing I often help women is I call it like simmering and throwing things in the crock pot.
Ooh.
So like in the day,
Yeah.
having to figure out where do I feel connection? Like I will have people break down passion, because the foreplay through the week, part of it is investment and openness of myself. It's not just partner related, but honestly, it's going back to the beginning of our relationships. So
Yeah.
much of our erotic template is what we created of. It's the dating, it's the coming over and kissing you. Like there's a scene in a movie and I'm gonna blank on it, but he's leaving for work and she runs out and she's like, wait. And she grabs him and gives him a kiss, like a passionate kiss, and is like, have the best day ever. And that is an erotic investment. It's those little things.
Yeah.
And I think we get caught in the trap of the day to day to day to day. And we've got all these other things we're doing in our to-dos that we really don't invest anything into that part of our relationship because we don't have time. And then we've got Friday night date night, and then we might get a little bit there. And so I actually have people plan. I tell couples all the time, your thing from your TED Talk, do a ritual of connection.
Oh,
and
yes,
do
awesome.
what
I
I love most about you
Yeah.
tonight is, but honestly, it's the touching, it's the flirting, it's the teasing, it can be the texts, it can be what you have to find out with your partner, what turns them on. I had a friend that she's like, my husband was trying to mix things up and he sent me like some nudie pictures of myself, and she's like, it did nothing for me. So finding out what works,
Yeah.
because what you might think is a turn on is really a turn off.
Yeah.
But it's just the consistent and persistent effort of seeking each other out like we used to do, and not having that be whatever's left over. Because typically as we get busier in our lives, there's never anything left over, and then we hit the bed and that's it.
Yeah, and you know what I also feel like you're speaking to is the whole idea of the slight edge, that it's really the small things that we do on a day-to-day basis that overall have the biggest impact
Yes.
on, in this case, our sex life. So
Yep.
it's not necessarily like the big romantic gestures. It's the
No.
small things that are really connecting you.
Yeah, and that's so true. I'm glad you brought that up, because I will have couples that will say, well, we went to Hawaii last year. Wasn't that enough? And the other partner will be like, no.
No, honey.
Like, and I love another concept of this is chore play. There is research that shows that the more partners are partnering
Yeah.
in an egalitarian, equal way, the sex life is a lot better because they feel valued, seen, and they're working together. So those little things do make a difference, because at the core of good sex is a good relationship.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
So how would you say because I can hear people saying this, I can hear this even in my own mind. Okay, I can tell you what I don't want. I can tell you what I want.
Yep.
Saying that to my partner is super scary. And am I saying it outside of the bedroom? Am I saying it while it happens? Like that, I can see a lot of fear around
Absolutely.
just that.
Absolutely. And that is the hang up. That is why people are saying, can you give me the magic bullet so I don't have to have the conversation? Because the top things we fight about and get divorced about are sex and money. And so it makes sense that people would not want to have those conversations. And it can be a skill set like anything else, learning how to talk about these things. We're never taught that. And so it's also very loaded and emotional, because we can take it personal. Like, of course I don't want to hear that I'm not that great of a lover.
Yeah. Ouch.
No, and so I really have people, one of the things, if people are not used to having these conversations of like, okay, I've gotten, because the point of like what I don't want and what I want is you've just kind of created a roadmap of like, I want to get here. This is where I'm at. But to start with bite-sized conversations, nailing into it for a 2-hour conversation, that's fine if you already have a relationship where your communication is high. Trickier if you're already struggling with communication and now you're going to sit down for a big 1-hour, 2-hour talk around sex. Trickier. So I have people even set a timer and say, look, this matters to me. I'm coming to you from the place of wanting to improve. Can we set the timer for 10 minutes? Or if we go off track, can we just agree that we're going to take a break? And setting the goal of, I want to have a productive conversation. I also have people be like, create a Pinterest board. Like, bypass like the sit down DTR, create a Pinterest board of images of what you like, what makes you feel good, and communicate that way. There's a lot, people write letters. I have people sit down and be like, I can't sit face to face. We do really well with letters because then they can read it, they can have time to absorb, and then they can respond, and we do better. And then we get to our conversation after the fact. And everyone, I also have people do the positive sandwich, which sounds cheesy, but really in the realm of things, starting with, I love when you do this, like I love when you tickle my hair, I love when you massage my shoulders and you do it in this way. I love it when you do that. And what I would love more of is if you tried it like this, or if you tried this and this, and I just really appreciate that we can even have this conversation. So do you see how it was like, love this,
love it.
slip in what I want more of, instead of being like, you're horrible, or this is really crappy and I don't like it. No one's gonna respond well to that.
Yeah, well, and even as you're just saying that, I'm like, I don't feel, I mean, obviously you're not talking about me, but I definitely didn't feel any sort of like pushback. I was like, you know, like I was with you when you're saying it. Your verbiage was brilliant. Like even just saying instead of, and I wish you didn't do this as like the middle of the sandwich and saying and what I would like more of, I think that is huge. That's such a great tip.
It makes a really big difference. And the other thing I'll have couples do is start with a hand massage and learn how to communicate about what you want more of, or what type of touch or what kind of pressure with the hand massage. So when you say, like, do we do this in the bedroom? Don't do it in the bedroom.
Okay, that's a huge, okay.
Unless it's like,
cool.
I like what you're doing,
Yeah.
do more of that. But if it's gonna turn into, if they're doing something that you really don't like at all,
Yeah.
or there's a hygiene issue, or there's something,
Yeah.
don't do it in the bedroom. Take that out, because in that moment, again, you're very vulnerable when you're in there. And so it can create more of a barrier than a productive conversation. But I have people take a step back, and instead of dealing with sex itself, okay, start with a hand massage.
Yeah.
How do you massage? And if I have a couple and they're just kind of doing this, I teach the other person to say, do you like that? Do you not? What do you want more of? And some people haven't even thought about what they want more of, or what they like, or what kind of touch. And so you can get into experiment and play. Same with a back rub, because it just takes it back a little bit, where people feel like, I can communicate around a hand massage. I can do that.
Yeah.
But taking it out of the bedroom is good.
Okay, so let me ask, and I know we're talking about taking it out of the bedroom, but let's bring it back to the bedroom. Okay, so we're in the bedroom. There is something that you don't like or do like, and in that moment, you're too scared to say, maybe not here, maybe more of this, right? But how would you even describe that thing outside of the bedroom?
Okay, tell me more what you mean.
Well, I mean, like if there's a position that you like more, or your partner is doing something that you really like or don't like, how are you?
Okay, so in those moments, those moments, it can be merely moving a hand over. It can be saying, it can be acknowledging through our voice, like, I love what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
That alone is vulnerable. So I say it and it sounds really easy.
No, it
but
sounds
like, I
really hard, actually.
love that. Or to be willing to switch positions.
Yeah.
Tammy Nelson always talks about, you should feel a little embarrassed after really good sex, because you open yourself up. And
I
so
love
you can't have great sex if you're staying in your comfort zone. You just can't. So when I have couples that they really, really want to stay comfortable, risk is a part of it. So when you say it sounds really hard, yeah, it's risky. It's risky to say, I want you to do this, or I'm going to put my hand on top of yours and show you. I'm going to show you. I can also tell you that for most partners, they really appreciate it. They want that information. So you can move your body, you can make responsive sounds, you can do body language to indicate, and you can say, what if we tried this? That's still a positive reframe from, I don't like what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
It's still a positive reframe of, what if we tried this? And that's play. Like that, all that is, if we went back to our childhood, if we're playing in the sandbox, we're like, what if we tried this over to the swings?
Yeah.
That's all that is. Grown up in the bedroom, it's just play. And when couples can get back to sexual play, they're in a good spot.
Whoa, okay. And I love that, because I do feel like there's so much of this fear around hurting your partner's feelings.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that just doesn't really happen as much when, I mean, when you're talking about this positive reframe, it's like, yeah, you move a hand. That's a good thing.
And that's, again, we're dealing with the couples that already have a pretty good relationship.
Yeah, okay.
And they're just wanting to take it to the next level, and they're not sure because they do love their partner and they don't want to hurt their feelings. And so they're not sure. They just need some direction on how do we take it to the next level. And also with couples where they've got kids or a lot of job responsibilities and they're traveling. Like they may have no kids, but they're both really invested into their careers.
Yeah.
I love planning sex dates. And when people will be like, sex dates, that sounds really boring. And I'm like, oh, you can be as spontaneous as you want if it's planned. And what it does is it also builds anticipation. Like think back when you were dating someone you really loved and you knew you were going to get to see them on Friday night. How much on a Wednesday did you look forward to Friday night? And you're like, ooh, it's almost Friday.
Yeah.
And then Thursday, it's almost here. And you start thinking about what you're going to wear and you start thinking about where you're going to go to eat and what you're going to do with your hair. That is that foreplay piece, that anticipation is a good part of good sex. So when you have a sex date planned, and we're not talking go to Friday night dinner and then after have sex, it's like, this is the time when we just, like, we know what's happening and we can both, like, you might be responsible for setting up the date or I might be responsible for the date, and it's just our time. And people, when I give them that and we actually work through that, they love it because they prioritize it like everything else in their calendar, and it becomes their sacred time.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you get, because I love that idea, but I'm wondering if there is pushback. So I just read the book Love Warrior. Have you read it?
No, I have it on my nightstand.
It's so, and she basically talks about how she and her husband, who had an affair, right, like, are trying to get back to this. Their sex life and the journey that they went on. And I'm not talking about that this necessarily needs to have to do with people who have been involved in an affair and are trying to get back to their relationship. But what I think was really interesting about this was, like, she didn't look forward to I mean, they tried. They were like really trying to get back to wanting sex, and it's her story, so she specifically was trying. And when they would set things up like that, like, I get that, it would be all fine and great if at the end of the day you were anticipating in a good way and you were excited about this Friday date. But I also feel like in reality, some people are dreading it.
Absolutely, and I work with all of those couples as well. And the reason why that's important is or if you're dealing with someone that really isn't interested in sex, they're not. So if we move out of the, like, things are overall good and they enjoy it, and you move into all the other couples, which that's a huge group of people. What also having a sex date does is it keeps it on the table. And then it doesn't even have to be sex. It can be like, this is going to be our night, and if we do nothing more than show up and sit in the bedroom and connect and talk, then that's how we'll use this time as we're repairing and restoring. Or I'm just going to give you a nurturing back rub. Because what that does with the consistency, when it's all left to just desire, like if I just feel like doing it, it can get pushed and pushed and pushed. And what this does is it creates a container of consistency. One of the reasons why I like therapy is, if nothing more, it's a weekly date to have to show up and have that conversation you don't want to have. And so that's a good thing. So setting this up, whether you are, no matter where you're at, is a good thing. I really think we're sold on the idea that the best sex is spontaneously happening. That's the narrative that Hollywood tells us all the time, that if we're doing it right, if our relationship is fantastic, then it's happening. We shouldn't have to plan it. And there's really nothing else in our life that we feel that way about. And so, and people will also think too, like, well, if I plan it, then where does the fun come? I have couples that get beyond creative when they start knowing this is our time. And I have couples that when they need to heal, at first, they dread it, and then they start to cherish it because they start to heal, they start to repair, and it just creates movement, and it's consistent. That's the big difference.
Yeah, and I love this idea about getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, that to me, like, through this whole conversation we've been having, like, that is resonating so much, that this is just like anything else. It's like taking the leap to leave your job when you don't know what's on the other side of that. It's like being brave enough to break up with somebody who maybe you're in a good relationship with, but there's something better on the other side. It is about anything, it is the same thing as any other area of your life,
Yeah.
that you have to take the leap before you know what's on the other side. You
Yep.
can't see what's on the other side before you leap.
No, and when it comes to sex and even connection, because if a couple has a pattern of painful rejection, which is easy, there's still a risk to be like, okay, I have just been rejected for years, but I'm going to try again. That's a risk. I'm a big fan of movement because it provides you information that the outcome may not be what you want, but it sure gives you more to work with than avoiding and dealing with nothing.
Oh, okay, Kristin, do you have any last things that we didn't cover that you feel like are super important?
I think you have done a really, really good job. And I will say, though, in the terms of normal, I think of sex as a skill. There's no reason why any of us should know how to have great sex. We weren't taught about it. Most of us didn't get sex ed. And so when I start viewing it as a skill, and there's fun classes and there's fun books, that's a way that you can spice up your relationship, is just learning how each other's bodies work. That's really important for people to feel normal, that learning this is a skill like you would cooking or a new hobby is totally normal.
I love that. Okay, and now that you're saying this, I actually have one more question before
Okay.
we wrap up. Because I feel like this could be really helpful. Are there any primary fears that you see generalized in men and women? Like, men come in and, generally speaking, like an overarching fear is X.
Performance.
Performance, okay. And then women come in and overarching fear is?
He's going to want me to do crazy things. He's going to ask me,
Interesting.
so couples will not want to share, like, what's your fantasy? I actually don't want to, the female partner often will say, well, I don't want to know what his fantasy is because then I might have to do it. So overarching fear is performance and am I good enough, and crazy moves, things in the bedroom. Those are
women.
pretty,
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Kristin, you're brilliant. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thanks.
coming and
Thanks for
sharing
having
your
me.
absolute genius with us today. Okay, so now Kristin and I have some homework for you. Take any one thing we talked about today. I would recommend the thing that you want to avoid most, the thing that when we talked about you cringed, yeah, that thing, and try that one on for size. Chances are it will probably start with a conversation with your partner. And we want to know how it goes. So post a comment below, or if you don't feel comfortable putting a comment publicly, please shoot me an email. I read every one. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who you think it could support, and make sure to check out other episodes at bayavoce.com. That's BAYAVOCE.com. And while you're there, if you feel so inclined, sign up for my email list where you'll get the Art of Connection episodes in your inbox every week, plus lots of other little treasures that only people in my online community are in on. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Art of Connection.